Because
Ngina was Kenyatta's fourth wife. He had 4 more children from earlier marriages, including one to a British woman while living in the UK. As a father and as a husband, he embraced traditional values.
he liked his wife to look like a Kikuyu wife, not too anglicized or westernized. Trousers, at the they were going to go for the inauguration of the Air Force, and Mama Ngina looking for the
women chanting away in their tribal song.
When it came to his country, however, Kenyatta was modern and progressive. Under his leadership, the infrastructure grew and the economy prospered.
As soon as independence came and Kenyatta government was formed, I think it was as if the whole world was waiting for it. A lot of investors moved in. The economy was very, very lively. I think his leadership really spearheaded the economic development.
In building this new nation, Kenyatta had an overriding priority.
Number one for Kenyatta was education. He regarded its education as a very important instrument in the governance of the country. Successful education system was very important to him.
In 1966, the Jomo Kenyatta Foundation was set up. Its mandate, to use proceeds from the sale of textbooks to pay for deprived children to go to school, continues to this day.
Nerias, come and demonstrate to us how to construct a perpendicular bisector of the line AB.
You first construct a line.
Thanks to the foundation, 15-year-old Nelius Wangare is now studying at a girls' boarding school in Nairobi. Her ambition is to become a chemical engineer.
You make another suspended arc over here.
Without the scholarship, she dream. For her mother is a single parent and her home is one of the city's biggest slums.
The Jomo Kenyatta Foundation has so far educated approximately 15,000 Kenyan need. The students are poor, orphans, destitutes.
I don't think that I could first have gone to secondary school. Maybe I could just have been left in the village roaming like some of my friends there, because my mother could not have afforded the fees to take me to a secondary school. I think that Jomo Kenyatta Foundation sponsorship have helped me a lot.
As well as nurturing his new nation, Kenyatta was successful in forging links abroad. During the years following independence, he regularly played host to visiting dignitaries and heads of states.
Prince Charles, Princess Anne came here and they wanted to see him at home. I was foreign minister then, so I took them to Gatondo, his home, and they sat there in an African setting, all of them being very comfortable, talking, laughing about their own country, about this country, and they also felt quite happy. He was able to adjust to anybody.
He had a wonderful sense of humor. Outside the public arena, if you met him in private, he was full of jokes. He had very good sense of humor. He made people laugh, and his memory was just wonderful.
On other occasions, however, Kenyatta could show a different side.
He had a terrible temper sometimes. I remember once Jomo Kenyatta, he had called the Baluhia people to talk to them about fighting in their area. They had been burning of houses, and Jomo said, look, I'm not going to send the police to find out who it is. It's one of you. But one of the people said, tried to justify the situation, and they used some words that were very unpleasant to Jomo Kenyatta. So he threw that fly whisk to him.
As the years progressed, it's claimed, Kenyatta became increasingly intolerant of dissent. he had the Kenyan constitution amended to extend his powers. In the euphoria of independence, politicians of different backgrounds and beliefs had joined together. But within a few years, factions were forming, and Oginga Odinga, once Kenyatta's ally and vice president, set up an opposition party. Rivalries came to a head when, in 1969, both men turned up at the opening of Kisumu Hospital in western Kenya. The crowd, mainly Odinga supporters and members of his ethnic group, the Luo, began heckling Kenyatta.
A scuffle broke out in which, on the main dais of these VIPs, somebody threw a chair in Kenyatta's direction. Well, Kenyatta obviously was very well prepared, and so were his people, for trouble. And trouble then began in a serious way. There was an awful lot of shoving and pushing.
There was a lot of noise that was being made, and the voices were drowned. And of course, it was the duty of the police to protect and keep peace.
The bodyguard of Kenyatta surrounded him and started firing outwards in a general kind of way. It was terrifying. The main crowd were about 100 meters away, and they started shouting anti-Kenyatta slogans. And Kenyatta somehow managed to get the microphone back and started to insult in a very salty way the Luo people in general. And on the VIP standstill, Odinga kept shouting back at Kenyatta. So it was a very, very explosive situation.
At least 10 people died in the shooting. Just days later, Odinga's political party was banned, turning Kenya effectively into a one-party state, and Odinga himself was arrested and detained. Kenyatta, by now, was nearing the end of his second presidential term and approaching 80.
Because the constitution had been changed so much, it gave Kenyatta the powers to detain without trial. And that showed clearly what kind of a despot he had become, an intolerant despot who could not tolerate any form of opposition.
Land issues also proved controversial and remain so to this day. They were cited as factors in violence in Kenya following elections in December 2007.
What happened in 2008 was not so much a question of election. It was a land question. Election was just a trigger. Every time there's such a thing, it triggers that anger. Any spark can cause a conflagration.
To blame, some believe, were corruption and ethnic bias in the resettlement of land previously held by the British.
I have to admit that the exercise was not as straightforward, it was not as successful, it was not as good as it should have been. Because if it had, I think we would have solved the problem which is still with us. Instead of really doing it in a straightforward manner, they were a bit crooked.
Kenyatta's personal acquisition of large tracts of land is also a source of national debate. But other events cast perhaps a darker shadow. In July 1969, Tom Mboya, a politician tipped by some as a contender for the presidency, was gunned down in Nairobi city center. His death came 4 years after journalist and politician Pio Gama Pinto, an opponent of Kenyatta's government, was shot at close range. And in 1975, Josiah Mwangi Kariuki, another politician who challenged the regime, was also assassinated.
I would like to exonerate Jomo Kenyatta himself from being instrumental in the assassination of Tom Mboya, Pio Gama Pinto, and J.M. Kariuki. I don't think Jomo Kenyatta was instrumental. Jomo Kenyatta was getting old. He was not even really, at the time of his death, he was just a respected old man.
His health towards the end of his official duties, although he made every attempt to come out of, sometimes he just stayed at Gatondo or went to Mombasa, and we will not disclose the reason. Sometimes he could not walk properly, and sometimes he couldn't read properly, and sometimes he couldn't think properly.
A few people around Kenyatta took advantage of his senility, and given that he was the president and a very active president as such, everything must receive his stamping. They used to make him stamp things that were not really properly done. A few of his own people around him. And that, I think, was unfortunate.
In August 1978, now in his late 80s, Kenyatta invited his entire family to a reunion at his house on the Kenyan coast. A week and a day later, he died in his sleep.
Ilikuwa kilio nchini Kenya, watu wote tuliona huzuni mwingi sana.
Despite Kenyatta's advanced years, the nation he'd founded was stunned.
People cried, people were upset. You know, we embalmed him, and so he was lying in State House. And I mean, just like him, in his suit and flower, which Mama Ngina used to put every morning, a new flower. And people could not accept that Mzee has gone.
Jomo Kenyatta's legacy was, or still is, that Africans in Kenya could rule themselves. He broke the colonial legacy. He persuaded people that they could rule themselves, and those who were in doubt, he ruled them and showed he could rule them with justice, and they could develop into a new country.
Today, we have a lot of doctors around. Today, we have a lot of engineers. Lawyers, you don't have to count them. There are so many. And all that in a relatively short time of less than 40 years. Kenyatta legacy left the country on the right track.
He left a very good foundation. It keeps Kenya going even today. Otherwise, there are occasions that have come. If there was not a firm foundation like that, Kenya could have disintegrated. It has not, and it is not going to, because of that good, firm, strong foundation that the father of this nation created.
When he allowed tribalism to get out of control, and when he allowed corruption to get out of control, the old man was getting older and probably not in full control of his mind. Because the Jomo Kenyatta, who was free, independent, thinking Jomo Kenyatta, was willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of this country. And I think we should remember him as a great man.
Let me show you Glovo. Order your favorite food and make the night na Skodiako even better. I'ma skip the queue and get your shopping delivered. Download Glovo and order anything you want, we'll deliver.
What's up, people? It's your girl Adiola. How many Africans still remember the story of Patrice Lumumba? In fact, I will not be surprised that some Africans have never heard about Patrice Lumumba. In this era where African schools don't really teach African history, I mean, we learn more about the Queen of England when I was growing up in school than what happened in our own history. And in case you're wondering why you should care about what happened to this man, well, this man, Patrice Lumumba, by the age of 35, had impacted a legacy that so many of our present-day leaders in Africa can only dream of. And he has inspired so many people, and even though he's dead, he's still inspiring people. Recently, the country of Belgium returned the only remnant of Lumumba, his gold tooth. And they tendered some apology, which to me is not enough. I'll tell you why. But for you to understand the gravity of what Belgium did in the Congo, we have to go back in time. Before Belgium explorers arrived in the Congo, about 4 million Congolese people had been shipped out as slaves across the Atlantic Ocean to Brazil, to the US, and of course to the Caribbean. But in 1885, King Leopold II